Inclusivity for gender diverse and sex diverse individuals. Hello, my name's Ash Calloway. My pronouns are she, her. I am presenting this on behalf of queeradvocacy.org. Thank you. In this presentation about sex diverse and gender diverse individuals, we'll be discussing ideas and information that may challenge things that you've already known or thought before. When wrestling with some of these ideas or incorporating some of this new information, if you feel conflict, I just want to point out the fable of the 6 blindfolded men and the elephant. If you look here on the screen, there are 6 blindfolded men being shown an elephant, and each of them are feeling their way around the elephant. Without the ability to see the entirety of the elephant, they're using their hands to feel what's available to them. One of them feels the tail and thinks it's a rope. One of them feels the leg and thinks it's the trunk of a tree. One of them feels the tusk and thinks it's a spear. Each of them is taking information from their hands that is not wrong, not incorrect, but the information is incomplete. And at the end of this experiment, when they pull their blindfolds off and they see the entire elephant, what they felt before wasn't wrong. They understand that it was simply incomplete, and they add more information to what their hands felt to complete the picture and see the entire elephant. So as we discuss things that you may have not heard before, or that may sound completely different from what you've understood before, just remember that it's not about erasing what you've thought or deciding that you were wrong before. It's about adding new information and seeing more of the elephant today than you did yesterday. In our society, we tend to conflate sex and gender and treat them as the same thing. And we tend to treat this conflated sex and gender as a switch that's flipped one way or the other, either boy or girl, pink or blue, and that it's one way or the other. Now, this does leave out a lot of information, and it leaves out a lot of the intricacies about the ways that we actually develop biologically, and a lot of the ways that we actually work together and express ourselves and interpret information within ourselves and in relationships together. So we're going to be looking at some of those intricacies and some of that information today. As mentioned a moment ago, biological sex in society is typically greatly oversimplified. Biological sex is the way that we describe and understand where our bodies fit in the scheme of reproduction. And it is best represented as a spectrum. If you look at the half circle and color wheel over the human figure here, on the far left, there's a block labeled female. And on the far left bottom corner, it is a very deep dark red color. And as you move along the half circle, that deep red turns into a lighter red, a pinkish color, a purple color, and it continues going on into a blue color, and then that blue darkens as it goes along to the male portion. Now this spectrum represents the way that a human fetus can start as a female, because all human fetuses, every single one, starts out as a female. And with the presence of certain genes, chromosomes, chemicals, hormones, or other conditions in the fetus or in the womb during utero or during the development of that person in adolescence, can masculinize from the very base female up the spectrum, and it will land in a particular spot on the spectrum somewhere, depending upon its makeup. Wherever it lands within the female portion, within the male portion, or even within the intersex portion, is what will determine ultimately its biological sex. Gender operates differently than reproduction. Reproduction, as I mentioned before, has everything to do with the body, and it is more geared towards the organs and the anatomy and the focus of it is a way of describing where that body fits in the scheme of reproduction. Gender has more to do with understanding how the person relates to others around them, how they interpret information. And the way that we can really measure and understand gender scientifically best is through brain scans. For instance, if you took the brain scan of a person born in a male body that identifies as a woman, and you compared that to a person born in a female body who identifies as woman, there would be similarities in the patterns and the sizes of the parts of the brain, and you would be able to see that their identity of woman and the ways that they consider themselves and the ways that they interact with their environment can be seen through MRIs and brain scans. So we understand that the mind operates separately from the body, and the parts of the mind that interpret and interact with our environment aren't always necessarily tied to or concerned with the parts of the rest of our body that are concerned with reproduction. Now, when you take the combination of the body that's concerned with where you would fit in the idea of reproduction, and you add in the mind and how it interprets information, how it interacts with others, how it sees yourself, and how it sees yourself in comparison with others, you combine those two components, that gives you an identity. And we're going to discuss more about each of those components and how they can come together to form whole identities. Every single person, even those that are not sex diverse or gender diverse, has a gender identity. We are all comprised of a body that fits on the spectrum of reproduction, and we are all comprised of a mind that interacts with others, interacts with information, and we see ourselves in certain ways. And our minds and our bodies work together to create who we are. The biological sex of female is the classification given to those that are observed to be born with a vagina. Now, it is assumed that females have XX sex chromosomes, but there are many females born with different chromosomes. They live their entire lives not even realizing that they have atypical chromosomes. It's very common for them to be very healthy, live very typical lives, and even to give birth to children and to have no idea that they have atypical chromosomes unless they happen to get a very rare chromosome test that doesn't occur very often. Chromosome combinations can include XY, XXY, 3 X's, 1 X, 4 X's, and many other combinations. It was actually discovered by the Olympic sports committees that were conducting tests on female athletes to ensure that there were no male competitors in the female sports, and they were finding continually that these female athletes fairly commonly had chromosome variations. And so it was determined ultimately that even though many females are born with XX chromosomes, there are many that are born with different types of chromosomes. So when we learn in school that females have XX chromosomes, again, that was an oversimplification that left out the details that there are in fact others that have different chromosomes. Females are also typically assumed to menstruate, have the ability to become pregnant, carry a child, and ultimately give birth. And while this is the case for many females, it could potentially not be the case for many other females. The ability to do these things may not occur in some females naturally, and it may occur for a portion of the life of a female, and it could change later on due to medical condition or human intervention. The ability to menstruate, become pregnant, carry a child, and give birth is not the sole determination of what makes a person female. A person can in fact not do any of these things and still be scientifically absolutely female. Females are typically assumed to be very feminine. Females are typically assumed to have softer skin, to have curves, to have developed breasts. We usually picture them with longer hair, softer voices, and while these things may occur more frequently in females, it is not uncommon for naturally occurring variations to happen in females. It is perfectly normal or acceptable for females to be larger physically, to have deeper voices, sometimes to grow facial hair. Sometimes female genitals could even develop so that they have enlarged clitorises. There are many variations that can occur in the body of a female, and that person would still be biologically classified as a human female. Males. Again, it is assumed that a male would have XY sex chromosomes, but there are chromosome variations that can occur naturally in males, the same as with females. Male development is typically assumed to cause masculinization in the body. We would typically associate this with things like more muscular development, a deeper voice, body hair, and things like that. While these things are true for many males, they may not be true for every single male. And even males with less body hair, even males that don't develop as much muscle mass, even for males that don't have as low a voice, they can still be considered biologically male. Male bodies can occur in many different ways and they would still be considered male. Intersex is a biological classification that is given to people that are not strictly considered male or female. The word hermaphrodite has been used in slang to describe these people in the past. That is actually considered rude, is considered a slur by individuals in the intersex community. It's very inappropriate to refer to them by that. The correct term for a person who is not biologically strictly male or female is intersex. These individuals may be intersex because they were born with genitals that are not strictly speaking a penis or a vagina. They may be considered intersex because they have atypical chromosome development. They may be intersex because they have atypical hormonal development. There are many different conditions that could make a person intersex. And contrary to popular belief, these individuals can and frequently do have very long, happy, fruitful lives, many of whom are even capable of naturally producing children of their own. Unfortunately, at the moment, because there's not a lot known or understood amongst the population about intersex people, if an individual is born and they are determined to be intersex, there is a very unfortunate practice in the medical community wherein the doctor and the parents will discuss the condition of the newly born child and essentially choose either to use a surgery to make the child's genitals look more like a penis or more like a vagina. This surgery is not done to save the child's life, to make the child more healthy, and it has no bearing on making the child more or less likely to be able to have children later in life. These surgeries are often the cause of complications and even pain in the child's life later on. The reason for this is because of the oversimplification and the insistence that there are only two sexes, when in reality we see that people are born not strictly fitting male, not strictly fitting female. So there clearly is another sex, intersex, and right now we are subjecting them to these dangerous and sometimes painful, unnecessary surgeries. If you've ever met a person with natural red hair or green eyes, which makes up about 2% of the population, then you have likely met an intersex person. And there are some people that would say, well, intersex people are a mutation, a genetic anomaly, and we shouldn't worry about them. Well, every single human trait, like having green eyes or red hair, is a genetic mutation. The ability for different hair colors, the ability to be different heights, the ability to have different skin colors, different shapes of fingers or toes, different shapes of teeth, different shapes of nose. All of these things come from genetic mutation, and we accept each of these things. So it's important as we have discussions like these that we start to understand that we should accept that it is okay for people to exist outside of the realm of strictly female or strictly male, and let these people exist and choose their way once they come of age. Gender is a description of characteristics, appearances, or roles attributed to certain people in a society. Gender and how gender is interpreted varies by culture and setting. Many cultures throughout the world and history have held ideas of genders that differ from how Americans traditionally have viewed gender. For instance, today, high heels are considered strictly a feminine clothing item. They are considered strictly for women. In fact, one of the earliest examples that we can find for high heels were for Roman military commanders. Roman military commanders used high-heeled shoes to make themselves appear taller and to make their legs appear more masculine on the battlefield. Now, that is very contrary to the way that we view them today, but we can see that the rules about what is for men and what is for women change with the time and the place. And obviously, there is nothing about the body, the biology of the person, that restricts what types of clothing, what types of roles, or what types of behaviors can absolutely go with that person's body because of where they fit in the scheme of reproduction. Those two things operate completely independently of each other. Now, when discussing identities, now that we've looked at biological sex and we've looked at gender, let's look at combinations of the both of these and how they can form an identity. A person that was born in a female body that was assigned female at birth would be biologically female. Now, if they identify as a woman, they would also be a woman. And the fact that they were assigned female at birth and they identify as a woman means that they are a cisgendered woman. The prefix cis is from the Latin word cis, which means to stay on the same side of. And if we look at this chart, the biological sex female and the gender of women are on the same side of. So this person was told from the beginning of their lifetime that they were female, and because our society treats sex and gender as the same thing, this person never experienced having to cross over the expectations of society. They never had to cross over what people told them they had to behave like or what they had to look like or dress like. So when we use the term cisgender or cis woman, we are describing a person who was assigned as female at birth and has always felt, looked, and behaved as a woman. When we see a person who was born in a body that was described as male at birth, but they identify as a woman at birth, they were described as male, and because society assumed then that they would be a boy and that they would look like a boy and behave like a boy and feel like a boy, they had to cross over. The prefix trans is a Latin prefix that means to cross over. So this person experienced having to cross over the expectations of society. They were always a woman, but they had to say, "Excuse me, society, I know that you think I'm a boy, but I'm actually a girl. I happen to be in a male body." And that was a little bit of a surprise for a society that treats gender and sex as the same thing. So the prefixes cis and trans simply describe your relationship to if you've always been allowed to be who you are, or if you've had to have a moment of stopping and crossing over to a new identity to get to fully become yourself. Now, an intersex woman would be a person whose body was not strictly female or male at birth, but they identify as a woman. And depending upon that person's journey, they may or may not have had to have a moment where they had to cross over the expectations of others to get to live out their identity as a woman. A cis man or a cisgendered man is a person who was assigned male at birth and they feel and identify as a man. So again, with that Latin prefix of cis, they stayed on the same side of, and they never had an event where they had to cross over the expectations of society. A transgender man, again with that Latin prefix of trans, was assigned female at birth, so at a certain point in their life, they had to have a moment of stopping and crossing over the expectations of society to get to express themselves as the man that they've always known themselves to be. And an intersex man, again, is a person who was born in a body that does not strictly fit the definition of male or female, but they identify as a man. A non-binary person does not identify with the traits, ideas, and presentations of how our society depicts or interprets either women or men. Non-binary literally means outside of the binary, and a binary is defined as a system wherein there are two and only two choices. So a non-binary person could be one of many different things. It just simply means that man or woman doesn't really fit who they are. And if you meet a non-binary person, the best thing to do is to ask them questions and be open-minded to try to understand how they view themselves and how that differs from our society and the way that we typically classify people as man or woman, and to learn from them based on how they identify themselves. Now, non-binary people come in all sorts of bodies, and a non-binary person can be assigned female at birth, can be assigned male at birth, or they can even be intersex. And again, when we say words like male, female, or intersex, we are describing the body and where it fits in the scheme of reproduction. When we say non-binary, we are describing gender, how that person feels, how they interact with themselves, with their environment, and with other people. And again, with non-binary, because it is not just one singular thing, it is best to ask that person and let them describe to you really what that means to them and how that may differ from your own ideas about men and women and different identities, and just let them explain to you based on their experience. Now, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, some of these ideas may have inspired a bit of a paradigm shift for you. Certainly our society is seeing what could be described as a paradigm shift or a fundamental change in approach or underlying assumptions. And it can feel as though everything that we know or everything we've thought before is changing or wrong, or that things are quickly changing, and that the world is entirely different now than it was before. And it can feel challenging, or it can feel scary, or even upsetting. And I want to point out that this has happened in history before, and we've come through it. The two gentlemen pictured here are examples of gentlemen that have brought about paradigm shifts in history. On the left side of the screen, we have Aristotle, the first European credited with saying that the Earth was a sphere. Now, if you could imagine being one of the people in his time to hear him say, oh, the Earth is actually a sphere, and looking around and feeling and thinking that the Earth might be actually flat. Long before we had airplanes, long before we had ships that circled the globe, long before we had spaceships, long before we had telescopes and different things that we have today that really reinforce our ideas of the round Earth that we do live on. Using mathematics, and I misspoke, he did in fact use telescopes to help inform his theories. He was able to conclude that the Earth was a sphere. And it probably sounded absurd to other people. They looked around with their own eyes, and it seemed common sense to them to think that the Earth was flat. Everything in their past, everything in their knowledge, and even much of their own mythologies was based on the idea that the Earth was flat. And it was a very threatening and upsetting idea to think that the Earth was a sphere. And now today we know that the Earth is in fact a sphere. And it was simply a matter of taking up the blindfold, zooming out and adding more information, seeing more of the elephant. Another example is the gentleman on the right side of the screen. Galileo was one of the first Europeans to say that the Earth rotated around the sun. Before that, it was thought that that the Earth was in the middle of the universe, and that the sun and the stars and everything else in space rotated around the Earth. And now today we know that that's not the truth. But the ideas that Galileo had were actually so upsetting to the people of his time that he was thrown in prison by the Catholic Church. And now today, even small school children learn that the Earth goes around the sun. So just keep in mind that as we find new information, as the ideas that we grew up with, as things that we have taken for granted as hard fact gets challenged, and we're having to add new information to complete the picture and see the whole elephant, just remember that humans have gone through this experience before, and everything has worked out fine. As long as we all keep doing our best to add more information, to see the elephant more clearly, and to help each other see more of the elephant more clearly, we'll be fine. Some things to remember: sex and gender are two separate things. So please refer to people's identities with words like man and woman, and only refer to sex using words like male or female when describing medical or physical traits. It is always more polite to ask for pronouns, and this is not just for trans individuals or gender diverse individuals, this is for everybody. It's more polite to ask for pronouns or to ask their identity. All gender diverse people do not always look or behave the same way. Gender identity is not the same as sexual orientation. Gender diverse people can be gay, lesbian, straight, or any other orientation. It is considered extremely rude to ask a trans person about any medical decisions that they have made or are planning to make during their transition.